stretch of the French presidential election campaign, the U.S. is braced sometime in June for a possible game changer in its campaign. The 9 justices of the Supreme Court this week heard oral arguments in motions to overturn the single most important piece of legislation passed since Barack Obama took office, his universal health care bill, which puts the onus on citizens and employers to make sure the now 1 in 6 Americans who are uninsured get coverage. Public interest so huge that for the first time since the year 2000 and the decision to refuse a recount in Florida, the court releasing same-day transcripts during those 3 days of hearing. Judges for the Supreme Court nominated for life by the president, and the most polarizing figure this week, without a doubt, 76-year-old Antonin Scalia, appointed by Ronald Reagan back in 1986. We can see one of his remarks that he made during the arguments. Everybody has to buy food sooner or later, so you define the market as food, therefore everybody is in the market, therefore you can make people buy broccoli. That's what he's saying to the Solicitor General. I'm not quite sure, Christopher Dickey, I understood what he meant by that, but basically it was something akin to you're forcing all of us to eat broccoli.
The issue here in the healthcare system, this convoluted healthcare system that they're trying to cobble together in the United States, is that you have to buy, under the Obama bill, you have to buy insurance. It's compulsory. And that's what Scalia is talking about. Now, the reason you have to buy it is precisely because it's not like food. It's not something that you automatically feel a craving for. But if you don't have a system where everybody's buying it, then you can't construct the kind of general welfare system that they're trying to do.
Like car insurance.
Like car insurance. But for some reason, you can compel people to buy car insurance, and you can't compel them to buy medical insurance. And that is the issue that is before the court.
And Scalia making other choice remarks. We can go to the audio transcript and hear another choice moment of his.
You really want us to go through these 2,700 pages? And do you really expect a court to do that? Or do you expect us to give this function to our law clerks? Is this not totally unrealistic?
Christopher Dickey, what it is, for a lot of people who follow this very closely, and in the U.S. there were people glued to these transcripts. Because the Supreme Court is the one place where you don't like cameras in the court, hearing those 9 justices is a fascinating moment for them.
Well, yeah, I think people from afar believe that there's this terribly somber mood inside, the sort of a sepulchral mood inside the court, and that there are no sort of sharp exchanges, when in fact what they're seeing here, particularly here, is a lot of sharp exchanges, very tough questions. The New York Times wrote about it after the first day, saying, wow, this is really amazing. Look how sharp these questions are. Obamacare, as it's called, must be in terrible danger. Maybe it is. But part of it, part of the reaction in the States is a reaction to the tone of the exchanges that basically people just don't hear.
And that's just oral arguments, and it shows a polarized America.
Well, of course, I mean, the whole issue of healthcare, I mean, leaving aside the fact that it's really appalling that millions of Americans have no health insurance, but it's really always been a kind of coded issue for what's really an existential political issue in the U.S., which is how much of an interventionist government do you have to have in order to have people live, the ideals of the United States. And it seems like every single election comes down to this, and you have an utterly divided country more or less down the middle on these issues.
It'll be the court's biggest decision since 2000, when the High Court, as we said, refused a recount in Florida. That clinched victory for George W. Bush over Al Gore. Has your view, Stefan Siemens, of the U.S. Supreme Court changed since that decision back 12 years ago?
No, not really. The fact of the matter is that with that decision, the court opened the door for George W. to appoint a whole range of more and more conservative people. And since they're all appointed for life, even with the change in government under Obama, there's a kind of a groundswell of conservatism in the High Court. And I think that, as Vivian said, it's a divided country, and this issue plays so well to the Republicans, because here you can generate kind of the angst, the eternal fear of an interventionist state. and that is great for getting your troops mobilized.
Will that stop Barack Obama's momentum if the court strikes down his bill, as it could well do?
What momentum? I mean, his momentum, what I see of it, is more downwards than anything else. And the only thing that's helping Barack Obama right now is the Republican Party.
Yeah,
because,
a lot.
a great deal. But the other thing that we're not discussing is that Obamacare is, as Justice Scalia quite rightly said, it's an unmanageable piece of legislation. 2,700 pages, it cannot be a good bill. It is a bill that was voted without taking into any kind of the measures that would have limited the costs of healthcare in America. America is already spending something like 17% of GDP for a healthcare system that gets worse results, according to the World Health Organization rankings, than the French system, where we spent something like 11%. And in general, it's a system that hasn't touched the interests of doctors, who are outrageously too paid in America. I'm quite willing to pay anybody who studied for 10 years and who has my life in their hands well. It doesn't mean that I owe them a Lexus every year. It does the cost of medicines in America is not discussed. The government doesn't have anything that exists in Europe to discuss the price of medicine and to bring it down. There isn't anything that discusses and fights the special interest of the insurers.
That's right, because the Republicans fought against that at every step of the way.
One of the ways to pass a bill that might have worked in America would have been to, the minute Obama was inaugurated, to sign something that said that Medicaid and Medicare were going to be enforced for everyone, and then we tweak it, which is how the French did this in 1946. And one of the reasons why the French system works very well, it's this mixture of private and state system.
Let
me finish. The reason why it works is that they could not afford to have an entirely state system, so that they injected bits of the private system into the public system. And that incremental approach to the French system, even though it is indebted, makes for the system that has the best rankings in the World Health Organization, and it makes for a system that the French are happy with, and the French are usually happy with nothing.
But they can't afford it, the French. And
they will afford it because they want to.
But the other thing is, I just don't think any American president is going to get much political capital saying, we want to do this the way the French did it.
Yeah. Well, they said we want to do it the way the Germans did it, and it did not work. So
we'll have the mixed system as the French one.
That's true.
All right, we're going to move on, because this issue will come back, especially with that. We'll have the ruling in sometime during the month of June. We're going to move on to the Middle East. The deadline is now. That's the quote of the spokesperson for Syria envoy Kofi Annan, calling on the Assad regime to halt its fire first, under the plan that was fleshed out and approved by all sides, including Damascus and the Security Council earlier in the week. The quote was in reaction to this.
Allahu Akbar.
Heavy shelling in at least one neighborhood of Syria's third city, Homs, this Friday. Amateur video footage posted on the internet. A stark contrast from images earlier on the week, on Tuesday, of Bashar al-Assad in Homs, promising to rebuild shattered neighborhoods. Vivian Walt, there were hopes that maybe there would be some let-up in tension, and it just doesn't seem to be panning out that way.
It kind of reminds me of, the worst thing you can do in a job negotiation is if you say, I need an answer now, the answer is always no. And I think this is Kofi Annan's problem, is that he's got to get some momentum going. It's got to get the peace plan in place. There's no deadline, no timeline for this peace plan. And yet both sides are refusing to disarm. And in fact, the opposition is so divided and so fragmented that it's impossible to even see how one would disarm the Syrian opposition. So I think that the practicalities are extremely difficult, and he must surely be aware of that.
And on the diplomatic front, it's confused as well. We've seen, on the one hand, the Arab League summit convening in neighboring Iraq for the first time in 22 years, calling for a ceasefire. There was something of a détente, as it was called, between the hosts, Baghdad, and the Gulf states, who are the most vocal defenders and advocates and suppliers, you could say even, of the opposition. Consensus on a document there, but no such harmony between Turkey and Iran, neither of them members of the Arab League, both neighbors of Syria, Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Ayatollah Khamenei displaying their differences for all to see during a state visit in Tehran. And again, there was this sort of hope after Thursday's Arab League summit that perhaps everybody was going to tone down the rhetoric a notch, but it's not going that way either.
Look, it's all gone wrong in terms of diplomacy. Diplomacy was all directed, with the exception of Iran, of course, was all directed at getting Assad out, telling him he's an international pariah and he's got no legs to stand on. Now, with the Annan plan, they're saying, well, no, we want to make him part of the solution. We're going to talk, we're going to have negotiations with him, maybe some kind of coalition government. He's winning. I think he's winning, and that's the reason that all these grand declarations are really in a lot of trouble, and everybody is having to backpedal, which makes him look even more triumphalist.
So what happens at that Friends of Syria meeting that'll be taking place in Turkey on Sunday?
Well, not much. I don't think we'll get, as Vivian just pointed out, the opposition is so fragmented and so dispersed. They won't get the act together. And as long as they don't function as one face for the opposition, an interlocutor, somebody to talk to, have a dialogue with for the international community, Bashar al-Assad is still going to have his hands up. And that's why he could say to the international world, well, the agreement, we might think about it. Yeah, he's just buying time. And every day going by is working out to his advantage.
And Kofi Annan is being an enabler in that.
Well, that's happened before.
Absolutely.
With Kofi Annan.
Many times.
All right, we'll see how it plays out, and we'll be covering it. Before we go, though, one final note. The Pope's visit to Cuba, including a courtesy call on the former leader Maximo Fidel Castro, 1 year older than Benedict XVI, asking his guest, so what does a pope actually do? Both parties congenial and courteous, it seems. There you see the images there. You'd sort of forgotten, Anne-Elisabeth Boutet, about Fidel Castro.
Actually, I hadn't.
You hadn't?
Actually, I hadn't, and especially when I see people going, in those wonderful holidays in the unspoiled Cuba at a place where they still have political prisoners and which still has misery. And I think that the visit of the Pope in that instance is, first of all, he did say Mass in Havana, so that is always important. And in terms of visiting Fidel Castro is hate the sin, love the sinner.
Well, the answer to that question, what do you need a pope for? It would have been simple if Benedict would have said, well, I'm the Maximo Leader of the Catholic Church. That would have been the right answer for Castro.
Well, in fact, it was obviously a silly question, because what Benedict really does, what Ratzinger really does, is he's an ideologue, something that the communists understand extremely well. Mm-hmm. And that has, in fact, been Benedict's role within the Church, is to try and reestablish ideological purity within the faith, something that puts him completely at loggerheads with someone like Fidel Castro.
At loggerheads?
But that's perfectly comprehensible.
At loggerheads, I was going to say, at loggerheads...
The of the masses, right?
I was going to say, at loggerheads, or the fact that they are 1 year apart in age, they speak a language, it seems, that they understand to each other.
Dementia? No, I don't think so.
No.
Oh, come on.
I don't think so. I don't think the age. I don't think it's the age. I think it's the history of the men.
But if you look at the ideology, the Pope is winning. Was it Stalin or Hitler who said the Pope, how many divisions? Well, if you look at the Catholic Church and at communism, the Pope is winning.
Yeah.
It does not seem to me to be any kind of a spur to change in Cuba to have the Pope come visit. Unless I'm missing something.
Well, no, actually, though, one of the things that the Pope said that was, I think, very useful was he came out against the economic embargo of Cuba. Mm-hmm. If you really want to take down the Castro regime, end the embargo. Open it up to trade. Take away all the excuses. People have been saying that for years, and it's been true for years. But for political reasons inside the United States, it's almost impossible.
And the funny thing is you would have the southern part of the United States going for it, because they would profit directly from direct trade.
But not Florida.
Not Florida.
The Pope then leaving after going to Cuba. We're going to see, obviously, a different Cuba in the coming years. And it begs the question, are we going to see a different Catholic Church as well?
Well, indeed. I think in my mind, it'll be kind of slow, but obviously it is already a very different Catholic Church. It's a third world church, and that makes it really quite different to the church that we knew in the 50s or the 60s, it seems.
I think one can only hope that the next Pope, the next leader of the Catholic Church, is not going to be somebody from Europe, especially not a German. I mean, if you look at the growth potential, then Vivian's, that's right. Then it should be somebody from the third world. He would much more be in step with the development of that, organization.
Well, one of the big questions is, what do you do about the American Catholic Church? I mean, we have bishops and cardinals, of course, who take line very much in line with the Pope. But the church itself is wildly different than the teachings of the Curia in the Vatican. It's a much more liberal congregation. It's a much more liberal group of people. I mean, most Catholics in the United States, Catholic women, practice birth control.
Yeah. Well, that's the same thing is true for Germany.
Well, same thing is true for Italy.
Yeah.
But this is a pope who has wanted to reduce the ranks of the faithful to be just the absolutists. It's a very Germanic kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And thinking that the core of the church had to be strong and pure. I'm not sure that the next pope, whether that pope is African or South American or from any other place, or Italian, which is maybe even more likely, is going to follow that line.
You might get a very conservative pope if it's a pope from Africa or from
You could
Latin
get
America.
a very conservative pope.
And we'll leave it there, but I want to thank all of you, Christopher Dickey, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, Stefan Siemens, Vivian Walt. Thank you for being with us here for The World This Week. Stay with us. Business is next. Marcus Carlson will have all the latest.